morning, everybody. I'm Noreen, and welcome to my kitchen. The other night on the Homestead Honey Hour, we were talking about, well, I have all this food storage now. What do I do with it? And throughout the conversation, and something that's in the back of my mind quite often, because I grew up with this story, and I often read it with my kids at Thanksgiving. Is called The Story of Stone Soup. And because it really does relate to what we do as quote-unquote preppers or homesteaders when we're in this mindset about feeding people, being a wife and mother, and being the person who would be called upon to take care of feeding people in the event that something should happen, being ready for that purpose. I do this every single day, but knowing how to do it in the case of an emergency is even more important. But, I had Deb from the Purbain channel as my guest that night, and she was with me, and we were talking about her meals in a jar, which are fantastic. And if you don't know about Deb or have seen her channel, then I'll put a link below. You should definitely check her out. But, I think sometimes we talk a lot about what if, and I always like to say, well, what are the two letters in the middle of the word life? And those two letters spell if. If is a big word. If I only did things differently. What if this happens tomorrow? Well, that's a really little word with a really big meaning and can have really big implications. But I think that we need to sometimes think about those things, what if, and go beyond our food storage in our mind and think about how we would deal on a neighborhood level, community level. Like, for instance, we live on a cul-de-sac, and if things did take a turn for the worse, I have a pretty fair knowledge of who's on my street, and who I would be willing to help. And definitely there is a couple of weak points on that list, but I think that you need to be ready to kind of, I don't want to use the word community organizer, but you have to, in your mind, think about how you would deal with all of those people. If you think about the people on your street, and you think about each house as you look at it, and you think about the people who that live in those houses, and whether or not they prescribe to the same mindset as you do is kind of irrelevant, because in the event of an emergency like a hurricane or a tornado, a flood, something like that, God forbid we do have some sort of down-grid experience and have to deal with that. You should probably be aware of if there are ill or infirmed living on your street in your small area neighborhood. And I'm not talking, if you live in a subdivision, you should know every single person. But I think it's really important to at least know the 5 or 6 or 7 houses that are around you in your immediate area, and know a basic idea of who's living in those houses, how many people, what they have, if they have special requirements, and so on and so forth. But I'm kind of getting off on a tangent. And I would like to apologize in advance. I know some of you are going to ask me, because I don't sound myself, and I don't. Going through some tribulations in our household in the last day or so, so you'll just forgive me and we'll move on. But on the radio show the other night, at the end, I did share a brief version of the story of Stone Soup. And for those of you who are not familiar, the story of Stone Soup, its origins are questionable, but some believe it's either French or Portuguese, which, same area. Spain, France, Portugal, all kind of in the same area. It would make sense. To me, it always made sense that it was a French kind of fable, and a fable, of course, being a story with a lesson. But I think, I've been sharing this story with my children since they were small, and I've listened to this story since I was small. And I said on the show, I'm going to date myself, because when I was small, they used to show this story, and they would read it, and then they would have screenshots of the pictures from the book on Captain Kangaroo. This was one of my all-time favorites, along with Mike Mulligan and his steam shovel and Make Way for Ducklings. And if any of you have small children, I highly recommend you look up those books, because I've carried all of those books with me throughout my life, and they make me happy when I think about them. But I looked up this story of stone soup, and I shared it at the end of the show the other night, and I thought that it really does have a fabulous message, and I think as preppers, it goes even further for us. And if you've never heard the story of stone soup, I'm going to read it to you now. So, here we go. The story of stone soup. Once upon a time, there was a great famine in which people jealously hoarded whatever food they could find, hiding it even from their friends and neighbors. 3 soldiers trudged down a road in a strange country. They were on their way home from the war. Besides being tired, they were hungry. In fact, they hadn't eaten for 2 days. "Oh, how I would like a good dinner tonight," said the first. "And a bed to sleep in," added the second. "But that is impossible," said the third. On they marched until suddenly ahead of them they saw the lights of a village. "Maybe we'll find a bite to eat and a bed to sleep in," they thought. Now the peasants of the place were feared strangers. When they heard the 3 soldiers were coming down the road, they talked among themselves. "Here come 3 soldiers," they said. "Soldiers are always hungry. But we have so little for ourselves." And they hurried to hide their food. They hid the barley in the haylofts, carrots under quilts, and buckets of milk down the wells. They hid all they had to eat, and then they waited. The soldiers stopped at the first house. "Good evening to you," they said. "Could you please spare a bit of food for 3 hungry soldiers?" "We have no food ourselves," the residents lied. "It has been a very poor harvest." The soldiers went to the next house. "Could you spare a bit of food?" they asked. "And do you have a corner where we could sleep for the night?" "Oh, no," said the man. "We gave all we could spare to the soldiers who came before you, and our beds are full," lied the woman. At each house the response was the same. No one had food or a place for the soldiers to stay. The peasants had very good reasons, like feeding the sick and the children. The villagers stood in the street and sighed. They looked as hungry as they could. The soldiers talked together. The first soldier called out, "Good people, we are 3 hungry soldiers in a strange land. We have asked you for food, and you have no food. Well, we will have to make stone soup." The peasants just stared at them. The soldiers asked for a big iron pot, water to fill it, and a fire to heat it. "And now, if you please, 3 round, smooth stones." The soldiers dropped the stones into the pot. "Any soup needs salt and pepper," the first soldier said, so children ran to fetch salt and pepper. "Stones make good soup, but carrots would make it so much better," the second soldier added. One woman said, "Why, I think I have a carrot or 2, and she ran to get the carrots. "A good stone soup should have some cabbage, but no use asking for that, because we know you don't have it," said the third soldier. Another woman said, "I think I can probably find some cabbage," and off she scurried. "If only we had a bit of beef and some potatoes, this soup would be fit for a rich man's table." The peasants thought it over, then ran to fetch what they had hidden in their cellars. A rich man's soup, and all from a few stones. It seemed like magic. The soldiers said, "If only we had a bit of barley and some milk, the soup would be fit for a king." And so the peasants managed to retrieve some barley and some milk. "The soup is ready," said the cooks, "and all will taste it. But first we need to set the tables." Tables and torches were set up in the square, and all sat down to eat. Some of the peasants said, Such a great soup would be better with bread and cider." So they brought forth the last 2 items, and the banquet was enjoyed by all. Never had there been such a feast. Never had the peasants tasted such delicious soup, and all made from stones. They ate and drank and danced well into the night. The soldiers asked again if there was a loft where they might sleep for the night. "Oh, no," said the townfolk. "You wise men must have the best beds in the village." So one soldier spent the night in the priest's house, one in the baker's house, and one in the mayor's house. In the morning the villagers gathered to say goodbye. "Many thanks to you," the people said, "for we shall never go hungry now that you have taught us how to make soup from stones." The moral of the story is that by working together and everyone contributing just a little, a greater good can be achieved. And I think as preppers, that little story is so applicable to what we're trying to achieve. Whether it's just for our family and we're thinking ahead of time, but if you think about that, we often talk about what about the people who are going to come to our door and tell us they have nothing and they're hungry and they need help. And we have all prepared, I know, for the instance that may happen. But on a broader scale, this story really makes a lot of sense. And I think when you really hear it, you understand. Community is just as important as everything else that we are doing. Knowing your neighbor, maybe not knowing your neighbor, maybe just knowing that your neighbor is there is just as important as knowing your own needs. Now, I'm not suggesting that we can help everybody. I'm not suggesting that we can store enough for every single person on our street. And I understand that people have to be responsible for themselves. However, think about what happens when you lose your power for an extended period of time. How magical it would be. And maybe I'm just being, maybe I just have my head in the clouds when I say this. You think about maybe, people are going to lose all the food in their freezers. And during Hurricane Irene, I lost bags full of things from my freezers. But think about how much fun it would have been, and a little bit of a stress reliever if several of the neighbors had pulled their barbecues out into the middle of the cul-de-sac and just threw whatever we had that was going to be ruined in the freezer onto the grill and started to share with people. I don't know how many of you have ever been through a hurricane, and Irene was my first, but it's miserable. After the storm comes through, it gets very, very still, and the humidity settles, and the sun comes out, and it turns into a sauna. But your power is out, and it's very uncomfortable. So you think about maybe alleviating a little bit of that mental pain and communing with your neighbors, and maybe that takes a little bit of that stress of dealing with a heavy situation out of it. And maybe you learn who needs help and who can give help. So maybe making stone soup in a modern sense isn't just about firing a giant cauldron up in the town square. But if you think about it on a smaller scale, it could just be putting your barbecue out in your front yard, and then people from other houses see what you're doing, and maybe they join you. Sometimes all people need is a little invitation, and then things all turn out in a very different way. So, I hope that you will share the story of stone soup with your children and your family, and I hope that you will take it and do what you will with it. I hope that you will understand it. I hope that you will share it, and I hope that you will carry it in your heart. And I hope that if things ever do get that bad, that you will always remember that great things can be done from very, very meager beginnings. So, I hope that you've enjoyed this. I will ask you to just keep our family in your hearts today. It's going to be a hard one for us to get through. So, till next time, I'll see ya.